Okay.
Back to the office.
Yeah, I'd like to make an announcement. If everyone could listen up just for a moment. The register will be kept open after we finish this evening, so you'll have time to get your last minute purchases. And remember, this is the holiday season. If you may not be back here before now and Christmas, buy now because we need to learn how to vote economically. Obviously, it doesn't work at the polls anymore. So voting with your pocketbook is where it's at. So we will now begin to do the three charts. Remember, when we do these, although we may pick your chart, it's not the same as an individual personal reading, which incidentally both Jeff and I do separately. And if you're interested in that, you can get a hold of either one of us. But this is basically using individual charts so that we can, like a teaching moment, that we can all learn something about how what Jeff and I talked about in general terms is brought down to our individual lives. So we are going to, we've already picked the three charts, and the first chart that we picked was tis, or tis not.
Hi.
Tis. Is that a birth name?
Really?
Then it is tis. Okay,
That's
then.
great.
Um,
Oh, okay. All right.
well, you were born on the day, maybe even on the moment of the summer solstice. And depending upon the accuracy of the time of your birth, which I would doubt, only because it's 5:30, and whenever I see times that are 5 o'clock or 5:30, I always assume they've been rounded off to the nearest minute or two or three. And normally that wouldn't matter, but what's interesting here is that even just a few minutes of Earth time would have put the sun back in at 29 degrees 29 degrees 59 minutes of Gemini. Now, obviously, we can say you are a sun in Cancer, even though you're born right there on the edge, but we never know. And what's perfect is that you were born with a nearly exact conjunction between the moon and the planet of we never know, Neptune, Neptune's job is to fuzz out the hard edges of reality. And so the fact is that with the Neptune-Moon conjunction, there's a piece of your life that has that sense of imagination or spirituality or, gee, I don't know.
Yeah, and since the moon represents mother and Neptune, it's sensitive, but it's also foggy. We can't be sure who the mother is. I mean, that can be a challenging thing. But what I think is interesting here, Tiz, is that the moon of feelings for you is in Sagittarius, a sign of enthusiasm that we've been talking about much of the evening. But it's a very sensitive Sagittarius moon. And sensitivity and Sagittarius usually do not belong in the same sentence, paragraph, or book. But having a moon-Neptune conjunction is about being, in Sagittarius, is about being sensitive and being a dreamer. Now, the upside of that is, I think, the imagination that you have. But I also wonder, when the moon is conjoined Neptune, it's sort of like, who's here? Who am I? How does this work? Because the moon, which represents feelings, is so permeable. It's so sensitive. It's so open when it's conjoined Neptune. And interestingly, the sun of consciousness, whether it's at the end of Gemini or the very beginning of Cancer, is in the 8th house of other people's values and resources. And it's almost as if like, okay, how do I fit in to their world? How do I belong in the world of others, or how do they see me, I think is one theme in this chart.
I see Tiz's dilemma as the feelings are there, are strong, are powerful, but people don't see them. People don't see you for who you are, for a couple of reasons. Scorpio rising can hold in one's feelings because they're so powerful. The sun in Cancer, fine, but you have Venus in fiery Leo, the moon in Neptune, and the North Node in fiery Sagittarius, a conjunction of Mars at home in Aries, expanded by its conjunction with Jupiter, lined up even with Chiron. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 planets or 7 points in fire signs, so there's all the outgoing action. Mercury in Gemini, connected up with Venus. There's the ability that you have to make things look good, to talk, to use your imagination, and behind that, your weirdo, eccentric feelings, because the sun is harmonized or trine with Neptune in emotional Cancer, somehow get buried. People don't see you for who you are. Does that make sense to you?
This is a super creative chart. That
Yes.
One part of it, I just think of it as artistic. You've got Venus, the planet of art and expressive Leo. You've got high energy for work. Mars, the planet of muscles and adrenaline, joined with expansive Jupiter in nice, juicy, fiery Aries. There's a ton of energy here, and I think the question is whether you use that to express yourself or to save other people. And maybe it's a little bit of both. So,
I would imagine that, we've been talking about these outer planets, Uranus and Pluto, squaring each other. And I would imagine that as Pluto moved into Capricorn a few years ago, and as Uranus moved into Aries a couple of years ago, that they would have kind of turned your life inside out, upside down, perhaps, going back 2-3 years ago. And yet now, as Uranus in Aries is it's forming a harmonious trine with with the moon and Neptune, I would imagine that change is finally becoming easier. That the changes that began when your life was perhaps a wreck or crazy back a few years ago, that now you're actually beginning to step into what your new life is, which maybe is very different than what it was 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago.
And I think one of the issues, I agree with Rick that the change may be easy for you, but it may not be easy for you with other people. Because Saturn, the planet of hard, cold reality, is roughly square or 90 degrees away from your Venus in Leo. It's getting close to your ascendant in Scorpio. And I think for you, it's just so important to express yourself whether other people are thrilled with it or not. That with this elevated Venus, the planet of love in your chart, in bold Leo, I think you really need to have a lot of fun, and you need to be recognized. And even if you can't explain it all or justify it all or make everybody else happy with it, I think it's more your job to make yourself happy.
And I find it interesting that, I see you nodding in agreement, but just watching you take this in is very much like that Cancerian energy. It's like, rather than going, yes, no, wow, it's like you're just going, I'm taking it in, which is very Cancerian. It's like, and people, I imagine, have a hard time reading you when you go into that mode. You have stuff going on. You know what's going on. I think you use this kind of like blank stare as a way of, kind of keeping people like off your decisions, so to speak.
Well, it's like, how do you take all this big energy that you've been told, hey, get it under control, don't bother other people with it, don't do that? Well, again, I think that's more their problem than yours. Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
kids. Ashley?
Are they applauding her or
Yeah, I
us
hope so.
or
I hope so.
Soul Food?
Soul Food.
Ashley.
Yay.
Hi.
All right. So very different shaped chart. The energy is different. And notice where Tiz had, hers is pretty evenly distributed, but with energy here, Ashley, you have less stuff in the part of the chart that says, I'm doing it for me. So, when there's less things around this part of the chart, not always, but sometimes it indicates the idea of seeking self outside oneself, because what's right here is like less clear, less compelling.
What I see is a Gemini moon, which is fast, bores easily, thinks kind of all over the map, maybe even shallow. However, there's nothing shallow about a chart where we have Pluto opposing the sun so closely, and that sun in solid Taurus ain't going to move unless it needs to move. And that thing about the inside-outside, doing it for others, I get the sense that with a Pluto so closely opposing the sun, there's that need to take your position and hold it at any cost. And sometimes the cost may not be worth it, but that's not going to stop you from holding your position.
Yeah, and I think I overstated things as well, because, as Rick pointed out, you've got Saturn, which is the planet of gravity, at the bottom of your chart, and that adds gravitas. That adds a lot of inner anchor. But this chart is such a contrast between lightness and freedom, the moon in light, airy Gemini, Mercury and Venus joined in, let's enjoy it now, Aries, versus heavy Saturn at the bottom of the chart.
Opposing Mars.
Oh, right, Saturn, Mars, and the Sun, Pluto.
When we do charts like this and look at a chart for the first time, there's no way to take it all in, and sometimes we're like halfway through the chart and we go, holy shit, look what I missed, and that's pretty common.
Right. So even though a Gemini moon in theory is light, when Saturn, the planet of hard, cold reality, opposes Mars, the planet of action, you have a high degree of accountability. There's that sense, because if Mars is doing and Saturn is the rules, people who've got hard Mars-Saturn connections can't go very far without running into the wall or being held accountable. They don't get away with a lot. But you got to keep trying to break the rules. You're a Uranus moon person. You've got 2 planets in Aries. You can't help. This is like the kid who goes, oh, God, I got punished. You're going to learn your lesson, and you're never going to do that again. Okay, yes, I will. But then you can't help it. You can't help but, out of a sense of curiosity, out of boredom, to break the rules.
And with all these oppositions, Pluto opposing the Sun, Mars opposing Saturn, it's like Neptune is the way out. Neptune is your saving grace, because Neptune is sextile Pluto, as it is for many of us, because they are both slow-moving planets, and we've been moving at about the same speed. But Neptune is harmonizing with both the Sun and Pluto. These blue lines take the pressure off of the stress, which means that it's the fantasies, it's the dreams, it's the spirituality, maybe the spiritual connection with the mystical realms, with astrology and other mystical spiritual practices, that really is what juices your chart and allows you to escape from the pressure of the intensity of always having to defend who you are against or toward, the enemy, whoever that may be.
But Neptune is about forgiveness also. It's about forgiving yourself against this pressure that looks more from the male side, from the father's side, because Pluto is opposed to the Sun, which is often dad. Mars often is more male. And so there's this heavy stuff and guilt stuff, and it's like, forgiving yourself and forgiving your father, not necessarily in a direct way, but inside of yourself, and going, look, if I've caused disturbance, if I've been disturbed, if I've had to deal with that, this is part of a larger journey. And that too, I think, is part of the gift of Neptune here, is to go, look, I don't have to feel guilty. Being responsible is good. Being guilty is worthless.
2 things about timing. One, Uranus is still messing around with that Mercury, but is pretty much done, meaning that Uranus in its 84-year path, Uranus was here when
so
you
the
were born.
buzzing in your head, we should start to be diminishing.
To detenuate,
soon. Yeah.
that's right. And Pluto squaring this from Capricorn is also past those degrees. That means the craziness, the instability, the excitement, the uncertainty, the adrenaline rush, the power struggles of the last couple of years may be finally beginning to de-attenuate. However, we're coming into Saturn's return next fall. And so pretty much when Saturn takes 29 and a half years to go around once, so sometime between 29 and 30, it returns to where it was when we were born. And this is often, it's an astrological rite of passage. And it's usually the year before. We spend a lot of time looking back and saying, where have I been? What have I done? What worked? What didn't work? And then you look forward and you go, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? How am I going to get there? And we often feel a lot of pressure, both around our first Saturn return in our 29-30 year, and in our second Saturn return around 56 or 57 in that period of time.
And the high blood pressure of the third Saturn return is like incredible when you're 87. That's a tougher one.
But the point here is that by a year and a half from now, when Saturn has moved past its point where it was when you were born and on into Sagittarius, you will probably sigh a great sigh of relief and look back at the last few years and go, wow, I made it through that and it made me who I am, and now I get to be an adult and live the rest of my life. Hooray! Hooray!
All right.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you. Amanda.
Amanda.
All right. We have all Washington-born people today. Look at that. That's.
Oh, well, let's get we don't have aspects to the moon on these. The others we didn't need it, but this moon is the handle of the bucket, and we probably should put that back in.
Yeah, Rick was talking about the moon up here as the handle of a bucket. This is the bucket. That's the handle. But it's interesting. It's like one character is apart from all the other characters. And the character that's apart, or the player, or the part of personality, is the moon, which is a pretty compelling piece of who we are.
Yeah, and technically this chart would not be a bucket because there's an opposition here to Neptune, too. Just for those people who are astrology geeks, and we wouldn't want to mislead you, because technically a bucket form of a chart needs one planet in a hemisphere by itself, and this does not have that. There's actually another. It's a two-handled bucket. I don't know. But what's significant about that moon is not only that it's kind of by itself, it's in Aquarius, which means it's by itself anyhow, because the moon in Aquarius, needs that emotional separation from what is around it, and yet it's doubled here because Saturn is opposing the moon, and so there's this sense of, even from birth, of having a harder row to hoe in order to get to where you're going. The amount of work that people need to do to get to the same goal isn't always the same. And for some reason, with the Saturn opposed the moon, it's like maybe your goals are higher, but even if they're not, it seems like you got to do more shit to get there than the other person who just goes there. And sometimes that's a pain in the neck.
Yeah,
However, you like pains in the neck. You are a pain in the neck.
Leo has a reputation of being bold, and yet this chart's pretty restrained.
Well, it's also Sun square Uranus, though.
Right, but Saturn, the planet of restraint, opposite the Aquarius moon, is like it's being alone in the crowd. That's very Aquarian, because Aquarian is very communal or group-oriented, but independent at the same time. And you also have Taurus rising with Saturn and the moon at right angles to that placating Taurus rising. I think the rising sign, also known as the ascendant or the cuspal border of the first house, is often an adaptation early on in life to the environment. And Taurus risings are, let's be calm. Let's just calm things down. Oh, did mom and dad look happy? Well, Uranus square the sun. It doesn't always work that way. Can mean dad split, whether he physically did or didn't, or he was different. and mom was depressed. That's Moon Saturn, or busy with work and responsibility. So the sun and the moon are each one has its own very different and complex quality. And I think in that environment, a Taurus rising is going to be, all right, let me not give people anything to hook me on, to get me into their stuff, to get into my stuff. People ask me how I am, I'm fine.
I think the Federal Trade Commission would have a problem with your chart because
they've been defunded.
Because you're illegally representing yourself as something different than what you are. Because God, look, fixed Taurus rising, fixed Aquarius moon, fixed Uranus in Scorpio, squared the sun in fixed Leo with Saturn in the same sign. There's all this rigidity and fixed energy. I know who I am, and if it doesn't fit in, then I'm going to, I'm going to ignore whatever doesn't fit into who I already am. And yet, look at this little story right here. Amanda is so sweet and pleasant and optimistic and yummy. The Venus, Jupiter,
very joyful,
and
in a depressing kind of way.
Yeah, and it really is like you can. And I'm not saying that you don't have any of that joy and that you're not that there's no movement, but it really is interesting how different these two pieces are. And yet all this Gemini energy, which is the Mars is harmonizing with the Sun, and this Venus Jupiter is harmonizing. It's wide, but it's a smart chart, but kind of sometimes stupid in what it holds on to until the lightning strikes and you're laying there spread eagle, naked and on fire from the lightning striking, going, what the hell just happened? How come my life is in ruins? And it's because sometimes you hold on to things way too long.
And I would encourage you to give yourself permission to provoke people. I think that's a good thing for you. First of all, it's part of what being a Sun-Uranus square is. A Sun-Uranus square is about, I'm here to discover something new about what it means to be a human. And sharing that with others is useful, but also the integrative north node of the moon is next to influential Pluto, which means owning your power, having those effects. And I think that's also a good way to use. Rick talked about all the planets you had in fixed signs. Fixed signs occupy the middles of the 4 seasons of the year. They tend to be a bit more stubborn and more connected to core values, but you've got all of this frothy, bubbly stuff. You get bored easily in spite of all of that fixity in your chart. I mean, I've got a bit of Gemini, and I'm very fixed as well. But I think teasing other people, entertaining them, provoking them, stimulating them is maybe a way to pull these pieces together. Okay? All right. Well, thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Tiz. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Soul Food.
Thank you, John Boy. Thank you, Mom.
See you next month.
Still open, and Sam is back there still doing his energetic magic. So if you're not going to buy something, go back and give Sam a visit before he's busy.